Alright, apologies if the video's shaky, but since I'm holding the plan with one hand, I've got to only hold the camera with the other. So, into this new section. Alright, so I've noticed something, which I'm calling antagonization. But to explain it, I've got to explain this concept, my own concept, which I call infinite complexity. Might be a thing. In fact, all the people who have ever lived, I think it's like 200 billion or something, almost certainly a thing someone's thought of before. But anyways, infinite complexity, in my understanding, or my creating of it, at least for my own benefit, is just that things are never simple. I suppose the key's in the name there. But just, we humans, we people tend to desire for a simple life, a simple existence. Not necessarily simple life in the situation of like living on a farm or something, but simple life meaning there's not always another thing. You just want to be able to not need to do anything. And I think this comes out in our media. Like, look at superheroes, but you can argue like Superman doesn't need to fly. I mean, he can fly, so he doesn't need to brush his teeth. Yeah, we'll go with that example, for instance. That's one I've thought of a little bit. But even, just think of normal, like, fantasy books you've seen, or shows you've seen. Like, maybe The Walking Dead, that's a show I'm still into, although I haven't seen it since, well, actually, the beginning of this vlog. So, I guess we can say that's like 14 days. But the thing is, like Rick, for instance, in The Walking Dead, at any point, do you see him brushing his teeth? Or I guess you do, actually, thinking about it. There's actually sort of a scene in there where he's brushing his teeth, and Michonne was too. But it's the sort of thing where, like, he didn't do that for several months, and he's got white, shiny teeth. And not just teeth brushing. They add those little details in there all the time, where it's just sort of things where we always have to do more. There's always more things for us to do, but they're only relevant sometimes or never to those sort of characters. Like if you ever go read The Hobbit or something like that. I mean, I guess you could argue that Gandalf, his magic, like, makes him stronger, but what are the hobbits doing? Like, they're not described as the clean, or, okay, I guess for that world they're pretty clean, but, like, arguably they should all have black teeth. But when you see the movies and a lot of times in the books, it's not shown that they have rotting teeth, nor is it shown that they have things like ear infections that also come from not showering. So, anyways, that's more or less an explanation of infinite complexity. Something I've noticed, though, is one, I wish I could say I noticed recently, but really I've just been thinking about it recently, is antagonizing, or antagonization. Of course, that word could mean many things. Infinite complexity, looked it up and I couldn't find anything using that. I mean, there was one thing, but I think it was mathematical. Anyways, so I'm comfortable using that term. But antagonization, in the sense of infinite complexity, I think people oftentimes use, they simplify the world they live in by making it so that there is an evil. Sort of, like I've noticed, and I even, for a little while, hopped on this bandwagon with the whole thinking of police as just universally bad. I know there's a video online that a lot of people make fun of who are against that political position, where a woman suggests they just cancel the police force. At least that's what she said. She obviously regretted it as soon as people started laughing at her, but it's the desire to make things simple. You see an inherent evil. I think that sort of happened with the last election. A lot of people saw Hillary and a lot of people saw Trump, and some probably saw Bernie for a while as the inherent evil, and that's why it's going to be a bit to, I don't know, rejoin this country, if it does happen. I hope it does, but because there's still a lot of people out there who see Trump as the antagonist. Think of like Hitler, for instance. I know calling out to Hitler is hard, but that's, of course, because there's a long history of us antagonizing him. He did some terrible things and he led some terrible people, but that's just it. He led some terrible people. I know he's accredited to killing 6 million Jewish people, or 3 million, maybe. But, and who knows how many German and Allied soldiers, or Axis and Allied, I suppose. But when you think about it, he probably never killed a person in his life. Maybe one or two. He led people. But it's because we antagonized him and made him into the source of all the evil that resulted, I think, in a simplification of the problem, which I can sympathize with. I'm also human is something to keep in mind. So I also want a simple solution. When something happens like, for instance, for instance, Hillary and Trump. I don't want to say which of them I liked more. Actually, I don't even know myself, really. I saw a thing once that said, Hillary was everything we hated about our government, and Trump was everything we hated about our society. And I think that kind of sums up my feelings on that election. But anyways, in that case with Trump and Hillary, seeing, for instance, Trump as the inherent evil, he is the problem, rather than the problem being, at least for those people who disagree in that way, the millions of people who support him. But even those millions of people aren't the problem either, because they probably just human rights, for instance, is by a lot of people, especially more secular people, considered a just inherent assumption of decency. Your opinion that all people should be just inherently equal. Or at least, in some cases, that some should be more equal or less equal, and in some cases that there should be accommodations to repay any previous non-equality. Anyways, there's a lot of people who don't agree with that fact, or maybe they don't agree with just one specific fact. They might be directly racist. For instance, they don't think black people deserve the same rights as white people. But that could be their only negative issue. There's a whole bunch of things that people dislike Trump for, but really, you gotta remember, he's a figurehead. He represents the leader. He's a simplification for them too. They're kind of protagonizing him, the people who support him, as seeing him as the perfect example of all of their values, even though he's definitely not. The only person he is the perfect representation of all of their values is himself. And that can only be true for everybody. As for everything else, it's just, I can still sympathize with how people would want to do this, because I also want a simple world. I just see at every turn that it's not possible. Such as another example of infinite complexity that I think about quite often, that I'll probably bring up again, is decision making. Even with, you consider something like Hitler, you gotta remember, everybody's got their problems. Everybody had a life which led them to that point. I know there's a certain, if I had to walk a mile in their shoes, if I had to walk every mile they've ever walked in their shoes, sort of situation, Considering that, you grew up as Hitler. Would you do the same thing? Now, I doubt you would do all of the same things. That would probably lead you to a different situation if you had all of your present memories. But at least the way I'm thinking, and I know I'm really heavily relying on the concept that environment determines psychology, and a lot of people will probably disagree with me. But if you had none of your memories, you were just born into Hitler, I think you'd probably make the same decisions if you lived the same life as him. Now, if you believe in certain things like a soul, but that they have an inherent effect on the personality, then this isn't a problem. This isn't even true for you. But if you believe in certain things like a soul, but or maybe you don't, maybe you're completely secular or atheist or something like that, but you don't believe that it would have an effect on the personality. Maybe, for instance, you're Hindu and you just think that lives are lives, we're all Brahman, although I'm probably misrepresenting their view in reincarnation, that is. But because I personally cannot believe that we have, at least that if there is inherent values of a person's soul or whatever it is, that they can't have a large effect. For whatever reason, it's much easier for me to believe and digest, I suppose, the concept that environment more or less invariably determines who you are. Well, anyways, just consider, like, next time someone cuts you off in traffic like that, I have those situations all the time where I momentarily want them to die infinite deaths. Terrible things. But then the next moment I'll realize, okay, they've had a lot of stuff that leads them to this point. Have I not done pointlessly cruel things? Have I not done cruel things without even noticing I'm doing them? Yes. Especially if you consider things like ants people. Then I've done many, many cruel things, and I have no right to ever comment on anyone else's cruelty. At least not in regard to them being worse than me, if you, given how many ants I've ignored and stepped on. Although I think, I don't know, I'm mainly considering this from a people perspective. Everyone has their problems. Even if I see someone who's consistently a problem, or if there's someone like Hitler, for instance, who I'm considering, I still think, like, okay, they have those environmental factors that have led them to this point. All right, so I suppose he's saying goodbye for us. Yeah.